Give me a thumbs up when it starts. Fab. So good morning, everybody. I'm Nikki. I'm from the Helping Team, and thank you for signing up to today's session. We're from, Mo, can you just put the slide along for me, please? Can everybody see the slides okay? Yeah. Sorry, I've got my thingy across mine. So yeah, I'm Nikki from the Health Improvement Team, and I'm part of the bereavement network that we've got in the area, and it's been running for a number of years now. And we meet, I think it's pretty much a 2-monthly basis, and especially over the last 18 months with COVID, we've been given updates of what the services look like, how we're kind of delivering the services that we do, and kind of building what that picture around bereavement support is like in the area. And we realise that while we're aware of what support is out there, other organisations and the public may not necessarily be aware. So that's why we put this event on, just to give people the opportunity to hear about the different services. And even though you're not going to hear from every single service that's involved in the network, what we have got at the end of the slide, and I will send these over to everybody, is signposting information for the organisations at the end. So please feel free to share that with anybody that you come into contact with, whether personally or professionally. So we've got Helen that's going to do us a little session on grief. And then we've got speakers from 4 of the organisations that are involved in the network. Now, I think on the Eventbrite session, I had it as Cheshire Bereavement Network, and we're aware we do need to change the name for that because it's not only the Cheshire area. We have services from Warrington and St Helens as well, and I think a little bit further afield as well. So it is a bereavement network, but it is covering pretty much the northwest, to be fair. So what we will do, if you can go on to the, yeah, I've kind of covered the next slides as well, Mo, sorry. So what we're going to do is look at grief, and we appreciate that grief comes in many different ways. Bereavement comes in many different ways. So we've picked a bit of a mix of the different services, just so we can get a bit of an idea of just what support is out there. So the first speaker, like we said, is going to be Helen. And if we can just say, it's entirely up to yourselves, we are recording the session. If you want to stay on video, you can stay on video. If you want to turn it off, you can turn it off. That's fine. So our first speaker is going to be Helen, and she's going to be talking to us about grief. Morning, Helen.
Morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. So you may have come along today because you're grieving and you want to understand your own feelings. Someone you care about might be struggling after bereavement, or you might think a better understanding of grief will help you in your job. Well, whatever the reason you're here, you're very welcome. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll talk about loss in its many forms, including those that the pandemic has forced upon us. We'll look at what grief is and the turbulent journey it takes many of us on. We'll consider some of the things we can say and do to help someone who's been bereaved. And importantly, we'll speak about what a life after bereavement might look like and offer hope that although your life will never be the same, it can be good again. Finally, we'll look at some of the ways bereaved people have found to get relief from the pain and to keep moving through the grief. So there are a few things in life that are certain, particularly over the last 18 months, I think we'd agree that's true. But one of them, however, is that at some point we will all experience loss and grief. So what do we mean by grief? Well, put simply, grief is a normal and natural reaction to the loss of someone or something important in our lives. And losses of many kinds can cause us to grieve. So if you take a minute to look at this slide, I'm sure you'll recognise many of the losses you will have experienced yourself. Top half of the slide tends to be losses we've recognised over a long period of time. But towards the bottom of the slide, there are some losses that seemed unimaginable a year and a half ago. We would never have envisaged this lack of social contact, the fact that we couldn't see people, loss of physical affection, all those real losses that have impacted people massively. And this pandemic has forced us all to change the way we've lived our lives. We've witnessed so much sadness, not just in the increased numbers that have died, but because many have had to die without a loved one at their side. Those left behind haven't been able to gather together to support each other, and bereaved people have been isolated like never before. So those of us lucky enough not to have experienced bereavement during this pandemic have still lost a way of life and daily freedoms we've all taken for granted. Who'd have thought we would have ever been told not to hold hands, not to hug each other, and that we wouldn't be able to offer a smile to a stranger who might have, because of the mask we're wearing. So perhaps more than any other time in living memory, loss has been at the forefront of most of our minds. With the purpose of today's session, we're going to focus mostly on the loss and the grief caused when a loved one dies.
Helen, just let me know when you want the slides moving on.
I will. Thanks, Mo. So we've established then that grief is a normal, natural response to loss. So if it's so normal, why is it so difficult to talk about? Bereaved people often say that they're only allowed to talk for so long about how bad they're feeling before someone tells them, the husband, daughter, whoever, wouldn't want them to be sad. Or, come on, let's do something to take your mind off things. So why is it that what they need to do the most, which is share how they're feeling, cry, shout, whatever it is, makes the rest of us feel so uncomfortable? And considering grief is something we can all expect to go through, shouldn't we all be open and honest about how we're feeling? Instead, the reality is that we close these difficult conversations down, leaving the bereaved person feeling isolated and on the outside looking in. And there are books and books of theories trying to explain why we don't like to talk about death and dying, too many to look at today. But I think as good an explanation as any is that listening to others who are grieving can remind us that one day we're likely to suffer the same pain, or it might force us to think about the pain we've already suffered. Unfortunately, there's no way around grief, only through it. So we'll take a closer look now at the ways in which grief can impact your life. Now, next slide, please, Mo. Thanks. So this illustration, very, very well used, very well understood. And it's used in academia and it's used to help people who are bereaved have a simpler understanding of how things might go. So if you look at the top left-hand corner, so you're sailing your boat along the river of life, and then along comes a bereavement and you're plunged headlong into this whirlpool. You have shock and fear caused by the fall, and there's no soft landing. In fact, many bereaved people say there's a split second, certainly in the initial stages of loss, that they wake up in the morning and they've forgotten the grief. But before they know it, they're dropping over that waterfall again. So that shock happens daily in initial stages. So you get to the bottom, you might smash against the rocks, you might be thrown into the whirlpool and you won't know which end is up. And you might be tossed onto the bank where you see there all washed up, break down. And you hear this a lot from people at varying stages of grief saying, well, what's the point? There's nothing left now. I can't even cope day to day. I'm finished. Sadly, although it might seem like you're having some kind of break from the pain, that numbness, the only way to calm the waters is to get back into that whirlpool, experience all those awful feelings, and eventually find yourself in more settled waters that lead you to rebuilding some kind of life. So this way of looking at grief is by no means perfect, but I think it's got two particular strengths. The first is that it explains really well the complete chaos of grief, not knowing how you'll feel from 1 hour or minute to the next. And there are days in everyone's grief journey when, with no warning at all, you're being dragged back into that whirlpool just when you thought things were becoming easier. Also, I think there's a lot to be said for the analogy of the boat. I think you've probably heard this saying used a lot during the pandemic, is that we might all be in the same storm, but we all have different boats. And when bereavement hits, some of us are in a large, sturdy boat, well maintained, you've got a good crew and plenty of safety equipment on board. And these boats tend to be built on strong family support, good social connections, good physical and mental health, financial security, and a resilience that may be developed from overcoming previous adversities. So tipping over the waterfall in a boat like this is still painful, but it means we may well be battered and bruised and are likely to navigate to calmer waters sooner rather than later. For others, however, when bereavement hits, they're navigating life in a flimsy boat that's in need of repair, with a small or no crew at all, and certainly no life rafts on board. And by the time they hit the rocks, their boat can be smashed to pieces, and they rely on someone throwing them a life jacket or raft. These boats are often the result of previous traumatic and/or successive bereavements, poor physical and mental health, financial instability, and the absence of a strong network of family and friends. These are generalisations, however, and sometimes, no matter how strong your boat's been, You may find yourself needing someone to throw you a life belt. And then there are others who defy all expectations and show levels of resilience that because of the circumstances we wouldn't expect. And obviously there are boats in between your luxury yachts and your leaky rowing boat. But this analogy reminds us that how we experience grief, and importantly how we heal, depends on more than just how close we were to whoever it was that died. I feel there's a tendency for society to place a person's loss in a sort of league table of bereavement. Now, for example, the parents amongst us, I would guess, are most likely to feel that the death of a child is the worst thing that could ever happen. And for you, for us, that is likely to be true. But for someone who's never had children, the loss of a life partner or parent or sibling can be equally devastating. So we have to be mindful that however painful and difficult someone's grief is just how it is for them, regardless of who they've lost. And comparing grief is not helpful and can sometimes mean that those who need support won't reach out to friends or helping organisations for fear of being judged. And if you're bereaved, you may find well-meaning people telling you that you'll move through the famous stages, you'll start denial and anger, and eventually you'll reach acceptance. And wouldn't it be great if that was the case? Because you'd know what was coming next, and you'd know the end goal was acceptance, which I believe implies there's an end to grief. Unfortunately, that's not how grief works. You won't necessarily know what the next hour's bringing in terms of your feelings, and there's no neat end. Now, next slide, please, Mo. Thanks. So whilst everyone's response to bereavement is individual, it can help to know that many people feel some of the emotions you feel yourself. So on those days when you feel like you're going mad and you're not coping like everyone else seems to, reminding yourself that there are others who share similar experiences can be the lifeline you need. So we can see here some of the feelings and emotions that bereaved people will report that they feel. As I don't know about you, but I find this slide really difficult to read because there's too much information, lots of jagged edges, and the colours are a bit glary as well. So if it's hard to read, imagine how it must feel to be feeling like this from hour to hour. You can understand how people quickly become overwhelmed. And often bereaved people feel reluctant to share how they're feeling because some of these emotions are difficult to acknowledge. You know, it's relatively easy to understand someone being sad when their loved one has died. But how easy is it to hear that a bereaved person is resentful, maybe because the person has been ill for a long time and no one ever asked how I was feeling. Here I am on my own, he's out of all the suffering, but mine just goes on. Or sometimes it's someone is relieved. You know, looking after her took up my whole life for 2 years. And of course I miss her, I'd have her back tomorrow. But now I can go on my walking weekend with my mates again. Even telling people you're lonely can be hard. One woman told me, it's as if you're asking them to put things right for you, to include you in more things, when all I wanted was just to say how I was really feeling. So if you are bereaved and there's only one thing you can take away from this first session, it's that all of these feelings and more are appropriate and normal, and you might feel all of them in one day, or you may not feel some of them at all. However you're feeling is right for you at that time. And try, if you can, not to give way to the pressure to act and feel how people expect you to. Can I have the next slide, please, Mo? And I've mentioned that obviously we're not great at talking about grief openly, so it tends to be hidden away. How can we spot when someone is grieving? So if you look at the people in these pictures, I think it's fairly safe to say, I can get that they'd be grieving. Head in hands, black, look like they're in cemeteries, or crying. Can I have the next slide, please, Mo? Thanks. But what about these faces, though? So surely anyone who's grieving wouldn't be laughing with friends, getting on with work or study, out at a festival or smiling in a classroom. I mean, that big, you got a soldier, big strong soldier out fighting the war, how could he be grieving? This man angry at the bottom, shouting at someone in a shop, he's just angry, but now he might be grieving. So this is the reality for many bereaved people. They don't have a big flashing sign on their head, giving the rest of us the heads up. They're living their lives in the best way they can, but can still be struggling months and years on. And when it seems to the outside world that they're over their grief, people stop asking how they're doing, which leads bereaved people to feel very isolated and like they just don't want to put on people anymore. So for those of you who are here because you want to support someone who's bereaved, remember that even though you might be seeing tears or sad faces anymore, that those emotions are likely to still be there. So just ask how the person's feeling. I can assure you that showing a general interest is never unwanted. And even if they don't want to talk or share anything with you, it's good to know that they're not alone. So we've just touched on, it's always difficult to recognise how people are suffering in grief, but the COVID pandemic's made it even harder. So much of life has been happening behind closed doors. So chances which usually have had to see how people are doing have been taken away from us. So no chance to just drop in for a cuppa and a chat with your mum. No bumping into your neighbour who might ask how you're feeling. No sitting next to a stranger at the bus stop who has no one at home to talk to. In supporting bereaved people in my job, I believe the pandemic really has thrown a kind of blanket over the grief of people not bereaved directly by COVID, as if the only pain that's registered is caused by the virus itself. And I've offered support to so many people who've said, oh, don't worry about me. You've all got more important things to worry about with this going on. Or maybe when you're not so busy, you must be up the wall because of COVID. I also had a lady say, no one wants to talk about my husband's death. They're obsessed with this pandemic. So please know that whatever the cause of your loss, your grief is important to those of us reaching out, offering support. Something I'm sure those of us who are working in this field will hear a lot is that people worry about saying the wrong thing to someone who's being bereaved. I think we all get that. But the worst thing you can say to a bereaved person is nothing at all. Not acknowledging the loss is worse than maybe offering clumsy but well-meant words. Next slide, please. Oh, there it is. Thanks, Mo. So these suggestions have been made by people who have been bereaved. So it's just a guide. Don't get too hung up. There's, we're all being told all the ways to live a perfect life all over social media. And this isn't, we're not trying to make you the perfect bereavement supporter. It's just, sometimes it can help to know how to start a conversation. I think there's probably a lot of you will see, I would never dream of saying these things anyway, but people will often say, oh, at least they're out of the suffering now. Well, that may be the case, but I'm in mine now. Or, they had a great life. At least they lived till 92. Well, that might also be the case, but I was married to that man for 65 years and I don't know where to start now. So it's just important, just try and take a deep breath before you start a conversation, I think. And similarly, don't try and find a silver lining. If a bereaved person wants to offer a silver lining, they'll do that themselves when the time's right. When in doubt, leave it out. This refers to mostly things that you may find comforting. Perhaps I'd say the example is religion. So you may find it comforting to know that someone you loved has gone to heaven and you will see them again at some point. If you don't believe in an afterlife, that can just make people feel even more despondent. So again, just being a little bit mindful of putting ourselves in someone else's shoes rather than in our own. And again, the comforting things, there are no words, can't imagine how you're feeling. And that allows people to say, well, this is actually how I'm feeling now, and share the truth with you. What can I do to help? But only if you really mean it. It can be a hard thing to do, to reach out and accept support. So if you've offered it, make sure that you can back that up when people reach out to you. And again, a good one is that, I really liked working with your mum. She was a right laugh. Or wasn't your dad great? He'd do anything for anybody. Or, your son was the life and soul of every room. Those things positive that can help people. Again, we're not here to be perfect, just try to be as helpful as we can. So I mentioned earlier, there's no clear end point to grief. So how do we build our lives again when we've lost someone? And if you haven't experienced the death of someone close to you, it may seem strange that bereaved people often don't want to let go of the pain, because that would mean they've forgotten the person they've lost. Next slide, please, Mo. This illustration shows us how we can live a life where grief's present but doesn't destroy us any longer. Very simple to understand. So at the beginning, every corner of your life is taken up by your grief. You can't think past it. In time, and we don't know what time that will be, we start to feel that perhaps maybe we've started to take up some of the things we used to do prior to a death. And our life is starting to build in some small way around that grief. Picture 3. So the grief is still there and it's the same size as it ever was, but your life expands around that. So you might find some days where you're right bang in the middle of that grief again and it feels as bad as it ever did. Those days tend to get further and further apart, the further away from a death you become. But as you live in a different life, that circle around it grows bigger and bigger. Now, I think that this model for me shows you beautifully how you don't need to feel guilty. You're not leaving a person behind. You're still sad they're not with you, and you might still love them as much as you ever did. But it's a different life to the one you had with them. And no time scale, I'm afraid, that take you from picture 1 to picture 3. It's just, I hope that that third image is a simple way to cling on, that that picture is there for you at some point in the future. That life is there. Can I have the final slide, please, Mo? Now, these are just some ideas of ways that bereaved people have found they can maybe help themselves, some in the initial stages of grief and some as time goes on. I think we've touched about maybe sharing our feelings is useful. So having a chat to a trusted friend or one of the supporting organisations that are part of our network could be immensely helpful. If you can't say and speak what you feel, sometimes writing it down can be really, really useful. And I think a real strength of this is that in time you can look back and say, oh gosh, those first few days I only had one word to say. Some days I didn't have any. But further down the line, I'm right, you know, I can see where I am. And if you might want to tell whoever's passed away your daily news, write it down in the book, that's okay. You know, you don't have to worry about saying to somebody else you're feeling mad. You write it down in whatever way is right for you and keep that connection going. Going for a walk, exercise in any form is great, but being out in the fresh air, just literally kidding your body when you're feeling so stuck that you're moving forward, one foot in front of the other, has been found really useful. Resting. Well, certainly when you're initially bereaved, a lot of people report not being able to sleep, and some just sleep around the clock and still wake up feeling absolutely destroyed. If you can just rest your body for an hour here and there, then take whatever opportunities you do to get that rest. The food, I'm always wary of suggesting eating well to people. It's not the time to start a health kick. It's just a matter, just try it. If you can, nourish yourself here and there. Keep, even if just small meals. Do you know what? If it's sitting down with a bar of chocolate, that's fine. But just remember that you do need to keep something going. As I say, not the time for a health kick. Eat as well as you can. The gardening, the football, they're just indicative of perhaps hobbies, interests, things you've maybe formerly done. And in early days, you're not going to be in the mood for that, I'm sure. Or you may find that they're the only respite you get from the pain. Whichever way it is for you is absolutely fine. Music can be a fabulous distraction, especially blasting it loud. And watching films, for some people helps, for some you've got no concentration. But again, these are just suggestions from other bereaved people. The final 2 pictures indicate what are the strength of social connection, whether it's family, friends, and the people who tend to come through grief and can manage to rebuild a life where they feel is meaningful, tend to rely heavy on social connections. And again, initially, you're not going to be those happy, smiley faces, but allow people to help you, allow people to reach out and take you out for a coffee or just make you something to eat and go for a walk with you if you're in the mood. Again, just be mindful again that your grief is your grief. I don't want you to think you've got to be forced into being happy, but sometimes it's good to know when you're feeling despondent that at certain points these things can be of use. Okay, thanks very much for listening. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour at great speed, I'm aware, but if there's, you know, anything anybody else wants to know more about, we could, as Nikki said, we're sharing the slides and we're all here to help. So I'm sure our next speakers will give you loads more information about the help that's available. Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks, Helen. That was brilliant. I think for myself, I've not heard of the whirlpool of grief before. I thought that was really good. And I thought what I really liked was the slide where you said, what does somebody grieving look like? And you had the kind of obvious one.
Yeah.
And then that second one where people just going about the daily lives. And it just kind of makes you stop and think, actually, yeah, people are still grieving just because they're going on about the life doesn't mean that they're not still struggling. So I thought that was really good.
Thanks,
and there is a meme that I see quite regular, you know, like you see these quotes on social media, which I think fits quite nice with this. And it's about talking to people when they have been bereaved, when they have lost somebody, and thinking like, so far down the line, or can I still bring it up? And the quote says, by asking somebody how they're doing when they've been bereaved, you're not reminding them that they've been bereaved, you're reminding them that they care. And I think that's a really good one, because they haven't forgot. They haven't forgot that they've been bereaved, but it's actually just showing that you're caring enough to check in and see how they're doing. But no, brilliant. Thank you for that.
Oh, thanks. Nikki, can I just say quickly, just if it's any use, I watched something called Modern Love on Prime Video last night. It's and the first season 2, episode 1, touches on what it's like rebuilding a life and a happy life after bereavement. I think it's excellent. It's only a short watch, but it's that little bit of hope. It's not gloomy. It's good.
Brill. Thank you for that, Helen.
Thanks.
So can we move on to the next slide, please, Mo? So we've got a couple of services that are going to show us how they've supported families through their grief and their bereavement. So the first one we've got up is Sammy, and she's from the Amparo service. Now, I said we are going to take the opportunity to ask 1 or 2 questions at the end of the talk. But just remember, we are recording and it will be being shared publicly. And the contact details and explanation of the Amparo service is at the end of the presentation. So you will all receive that. So you'll all have that information to hand as well. Okay, so Sammy, over to you.
Thanks, Nikki. Thank you for inviting me today. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. What I'm going to do, as Nikki said earlier, is you are going to get a bit more information about our service, but just to introduce who we are part of Listening Ear, which is a counselling charity, and we are based in Merseyside, in Cheshire, Merseyside. And we've been running successfully across Cheshire and Merseyside for about 5 years now. So Amparo is our suicide postvention service that we have started, and we've been running across Cheshire, Merseyside and Liverpool, and we now run across Lancashire, South Yorkshire and Kent and Medway as well. So it's great that we're able to offer that support. So just a little bit about who we are, and then I'll talk about some case studies. I know I've got about 10 minutes, so I'll try and do this very fast. Amparo comes from the Spanish verb ampara, which is the action of seeking help and protection. So ampara is the noun used for protection and some instances shelter. So the main aim of Amparo is to provide help and protection for all of those who are bereaved and affected by a suicide in a timely and very bespoke manner. So we offer anybody affected by that, by a suicide, support to minimise that further risk to themselves, possibly. So there are 2 different ways to come into our service. They can be a referral from somebody else, whether that be a friend or a professional, as long as that person consents, or there can be a self-referral process as well. So what I've got is 2 case studies, and I'm going to just give you some brief information of how we supported these families, really, of their case studies. So the first referral was a self-referral. It was through the Amparo telephone line. We have a telephone line as well that people can call into. And this was a referral for somebody who had lost their daughter recently, and they'd actually spoken to the daughter a few days before they'd taken their life. So they were obviously really traumatized and very upset. So we were able to talk about that response and some of those responses around grief that we've just been looking at. And we also were able to make a call to a GP as that person was struggling to get an appointment to see their GP. And we see this quite often with people that we support, that sometimes it can be really difficult trying to make that call, and especially when you're feeling like, you know, very traumatized and very upset. So we were able to do that. And we also were able to post out some information for everybody that we work with. We send them a booklet called Helpers at Hand, and that's a book for someone who has lost somebody by suicide, that provides information and a guide. So we'll talk about normal grief, but it also will give information about other services that are available and other support that somebody might want. So we posted that information out to that person, but we also talked about a normal grief process and what that might be like. We made a referral to a counselling service, and we look at local services within the area, and we made a referral to that counselling service, and luckily enough that was taken up. Now, often people might be waiting for that specialist support, and we can provide that emotional support whilst that person is waiting, and we were able to do that for that individual. We also provided information of SOBs, and I know Derek is here from SOBs today, and we always signpost to survivors bereavement by suicide, and we always give them the helpline number, but we also give them some advice about their local support groups as well. We were able to, for this individual, to make contact with the coroner as well, and provide information around an inquest. For somebody who has lost somebody by suicide, there will be an inquest on most occasions, and not everybody is used to that inquest process and what that might look like. So we can provide information about that inquest, and we can also attend the inquest. And with this person, we did provide that support and attend the inquest with them. And we obviously had that regular contact, and then until they were happy to move away from Amparo. Now, when I say move away from Amparo, I don't mean that they decided that's it, they didn't want our support anymore. I think sometimes it's just a gradual process, and we will support anybody up until the inquest and post-inquest as well. So it's almost like an open-ended offer of support for that person. So just another example as well of support, we offered support. This was a referral that we received from the coroner's officer regarding somebody who'd lost their partner. Now, the person had 3 children. We made the call within that 24 hours. We always promised to make contact within 24 hours of receiving a referral. And again, we had that initial contact and initial conversation with that person. The funeral hadn't taken place, so we were asked to make contact after that funeral had taken place. And we then posted the Help at Hand booklet and provided other information regarding local services that may be able to support them. We were then, once we had some contact with, after the funeral taking place with the person, we then were able to signpost to a local support group. And what we did, we signposted to a group called Widowed and Young, which we were able, I think it cost about £25 to join that group, but we were able to support and get a discount in that cost as well, because that person had lost a partner. They were obviously concerned about finances and things like that, so that just helped put them in contact with other people who may be able to provide some advice about what was happening for them. So we also made a referral to Child Bereavement UK for support for the children, and we were able to put some counselling in place for the children. And we were also made a referral to a counselling service locally for that individual, because obviously they had the children, they didn't want somewhere they could travel to, so too far from where they were living. So we put that referral in as well, and we were successful in getting that counselling sorted for them. We again provided them the SOBs and the local support group, and what they did is they found that the online forum, etc., and those groups were really, really useful, and they ended up joining all sorts of other groups that around bereavement and loss of a loved one, and they found that was really helpful for them as well. We provided a letter of support to help fund granting to a grant towards the funeral costs as well for that family, and that was really important because obviously they were under pressure financially, and they were worried about how they were going to pay for that funeral. So that letter just enabled them to make sure that they could get that grant, and they were successful in receiving that grant as well. So we've continued to make regular contact with that family, and the inquest, we didn't need to attend the inquest. The family weren't going to the inquest, so that was, but they've asked us to maintain contact until post the first anniversary of their loss loss of their loved one, and that's important for them, that they feel that they get past that milestone, really. Okay. Now that's just a whistle-stop tour of some of the support. Obviously we provide one-to-one individual support. We can help with any media inquiries and things like that that might be involved, but as we say, we provide very much practical support when it might be dealing with the police, dealing with the coroner, etc., and helping overcome those feelings of isolation. As we talked about earlier, people can feel very isolated, and what we do when we make contact with clients, we almost normalize that conversation, and we will use the word suicide, and sometimes people are very uncomfortable using that word and having those conversations with somebody who's lost a loved one in that manner. But we put people in touch with local services, and it's great when that is helping with that person to again sort of think about that support and not feeling as isolated as they could be. Okay, so I'm hoping that if there are some questions, I can answer them. If not, I'll wait till the end.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Sammy. Is there any questions? Have we got any hands up? Remember, we are recording, so if you do want to wait until the session at the end when we start recording, please feel free to do so then. If anyone's having any issues with the connections, and you've got your video on, if you turn your video off, that's got Claire.
Hello, yes, good morning. I was just wondering, the services that you've just mentioned, is that local to the area? I'm actually in Bristol, and sadly my brother took his own life 6 weeks ago, and I'm wondering if there's is that service that you've just talked about in Paro, it sounds fantastic, but is it just for the northeast or northwest, sorry?
I can answer that, Claire. In every area there will be a bereavement service, a post-vention support service for anybody who's lost somebody by suicide, but we only cover most of the northwest. But I can, if you want to, I can find out what service is available in your area, and if you put your email in the chat or wherever, I can do that. Or if you want to contact us via the website, that'd be fine. I can do that for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And Catherine?
Yeah, so just following on from what Claire's just said, just about knowing the services, is there any sort of type of directory or list of contacts or key services for the area that helps with these types, so suicide, bereavement, etc.? So you've mentioned a few in the organisations, but it's just to have those key contacts, because I think that's part of the challenge sometimes, isn't it, is knowing who to go to for what aspects, really.
It is, absolutely, yeah. I mean, when I send the presentation out to yourselves, because I'm not going to go through every single slide, because the last ones are more of like that signposting, but there is Warrington Borough Council have got their Happy OK Sad website, and there will be signposting within within Halton Borough Council. We've got the mental health info point, and there's signposting within that as well, and we have got links in the presentation for both of them. But yeah, trying to have kind of a definitive directory, it's kind of the thing that's always being asked about, and it's something that would be a kind of 24-hour 7 days a week job for somebody to keep that up to date, because as soon as you've kind of produced that information, somebody will change service and it'll need updating again. So there are a couple of resources that we have got, and we will be sharing with you. Is
Great. Sorry.
okay?
Yeah, just following on from that then, just in terms of funding, so I don't know whether you're going to cover that. Is there sort of key services where there's an eligibility for means tested or anything like that, or are these services completely open to everybody?
As far as I'm aware, if anyone wants to kind of chip in, but as far as I'm aware, the majority of the services that we've got present today are free of charge.
Okay, that's fab. Thank you.
Yeah, nobody corrected me. I think I'm right in saying that. If there is any charge, with the services, it will be listed, and I know there is one in particular that there is a charge for some of the counselling services, but that is in the information that we've got in the presentation.
Yeah, I think, you know, if we think about sort of, we're commissioned by public health, so they pay for the service. So the only sort of criteria is that you're resident in the area that might we offer support in.
Fab, thank you. So we've got, if we could go on to the next slide, Mo, please. So now we've got an account from Child Bereavement on how they've supported a family, and it's Nicola that's going to give us this account. Now, after this one, we are going to have a quick 5-minute comfort break, give you a chance to get a brew and things like that, and then we will come back. We've got 2 more accounts, and then we will have the private question and answer session after that. Okay, so Nicola, do you want to give us your account?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
As Nikki said, later on there'll be a slide with a bit more information about what we do as a charity. Just to say briefly, what we do is we support families where children under the age of 25 are bereaved of anyone important to them, and adults are bereaved of a child of any age. But we'll go into how to access our service and the types of services we offer a little bit later on. A woman called Louise, who used our service a few years ago, has very kindly allowed us to share her experience, and she's given us a first-person account, which I'm going to read out and share with you now. So on the 27th of July 2015, my husband Phil died very suddenly after a diagnosis of bowel cancer after only 2 sessions of chemotherapy due to reaction with his ulcerative colitis. 3 months earlier, upon diagnosis, we were told by doctors that they didn't feel it be necessary at that moment to mention it to my 3 children, so we didn't. My husband was admitted to hospital with no real understanding as to why he was feeling the way he was. A week after he was admitted, we were told there was nothing more that could be done for him. That evening, I had to go home and explain to my then 10, 8 and 4-year-olds that Daddy was very, very poorly and he was going to die. Quite possibly the most horrendous moment of my life. My youngest had very little understanding of what was going on, but the other 2 certainly knew what I meant, but couldn't comprehend the whys or wherefores. My eldest, my son, did not cry. He listened and watched as the rest of us got upset. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, I watched as my normally placid little boy became very angry about anything and everything. Sat watching through the window at my mum's, he kept kicking his football harder and harder at the wall. I knew I needed to find someone that could help us all through. Phil was due to get a bed at St Rocco's Hospice in Warrington, but unfortunately he died before one became available. The End of Life team had given me a folder containing lots of information about what I might need to do next and where to find help. Luckily, this contained a leaflet for Child Bereavement UK. I phoned the number and was given important information about the team, who at the time were based in Runcorn. I managed to get an appointment within 2 weeks, which I was so grateful for. I had an initial meeting with one of the bereavement support practitioners and talked through everything that had happened and how the children were. I was really concerned as none of them were willing to talk about what happened, and due to the fact it was the summer holidays, there was no routine and everything felt out of control. The children were very hesitant about starting the support, and I did feel that I'd have a bit of a battle on my hands. The children were happy to speak to someone with me present and the 3 of them together. We met with Claire Bullen, who really helped us all make sense of things and feel at ease. The children were able to talk about their dad and the things that we did together, but found it very difficult to talk about how they felt. I'm not certain they really knew. We had a number of sessions with Claire, and the children all got involved to a certain extent. They enjoyed doing the activities, which was an easy way to help talk. One of the main things that as a parent I've been comforted by with CB UK is the fact that I know my children can access the service as many times as they need up to the age of 25. Having looked back on our sessions now, I do wonder if the sessions were a little too soon after Phil died and the children were all still in shock. Over the 6 years since Phil died, my youngest has gone back to Claire for some sessions on her own, as she was really struggling after around the 2 years mark. And I think it was only then that the sheer gravity of what had happened could be understood by her. She really enjoyed the sessions and found herself looking forward to going so that she could spend the time doing things about her dad. My children are quite quiet and introverted and didn't really want to engage in any of the group sessions where they could meet with other children who'd experienced loss. I personally feel that it might have helped, but I didn't want to force them. My son still says, why would I want to talk about something that upsets me? In December 2019, my middle child was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, just like her dad. This diagnosis brought on much trauma and a real reaction to her dad dying. She started to really grieve for her dad, which I don't think had happened up until that point. Again, we reached out to Claire, and again, plans were put in place for me to be seen again. Unfortunately, COVID hit, so face-to-face sessions were not an option. Having discussed it with my daughter, she really didn't feel that telephone or video sessions were the right thing for her at the time. And a year on, after having spent some time just having a break from society, and with her health massively improved, I now have a healthier and happier daughter who no longer feels she needs the support of Child Bereavement UK. But we know that if the time ever comes again, they are always here for us and just a phone call away. I couldn't be more grateful for their help and have recommended them to many others. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Louise for sharing that with us. I think it's always nice to have a bit of a first-hand account of what it's like to have support. Did anybody have any questions at this point? I know we're going to go into later on how to access the support of Child Bereavement UK.
Thanks, Nicola. Have we got any questions? I think Catherine and Claire's hands are still up from the previous session. So if we've got any other questions, remember we are recording, so we can have more questions in the private session after we've had the other two accounts. So is everybody okay? Appreciate to the experiences that people have had, and I think that one that Nicola's talked about was the one that really structured the session for us and kind of give us the direction we were going to go into, and felt it was much more, you'd get much more from it by hearing the practical examples of how people have been supported, rather than us just tell you kind of what those services look like and how you can refer in. I think giving those very practical examples of support gives a much better kind of depth of knowledge of the services. So if we haven't got any questions at the minute, what we'll do is we'll have a 5-minute break now, quick comfort break, and then we will come back and we've got 2 more accounts, and then we will have that last final kind of question and answer session, and just the opportunity to ask any questions and kind of speak about the services and things like that. Okay, so we're at 47 now, so tell you what, we'll come back at 5:02, so just a little bit more than 5 minutes. So we'll see you back at 5:02. Don't hang up or anything. You can just mute, turn your videos off, and we will see you back at 5:02. Thank you very much. Mo, are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to just pause the recording while we're on the break?
Do you know what, Nick? I don't know how to pause it, and I don't want to lose it. So I'm just
okay, no problem.
a little bit of music in the background.
Okay. Hi everybody, so I hope everybody's back and we're all okay. So we've got two more speakers to come up, and then we will have the questions section at the end. And what we'll do, if it's okay, Mo, while we've got that question section going on, if we can just like be clicking through the final slides, just bringing up the information on the services, just so people can see them. We will send them out to you as well, though, so don't feel like you have to make loads of notes or anything. Okay, so next up, we've got Derek. Is Derek back with us? We've got Derek from SOBS, the Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide, and he's going to share an account of how SOBS have supported a family. Are you with us, Derek?
I'm here, Nicola. Nikki, yeah, I'm here. Thank you very much.
Fab. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Derek Hall. I'm a volunteer at the Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide group, or SOBS for short. We're a charity that is nationally based, and we do serve most parts of the country. We provide emotional support for suicide bereavement. Now, we're not professionals, we're not qualified doctors, counsellors, medical people. We're actually people who have been bereaved by suicide. And all our volunteers at the local groups are on the helpline or the other methods of support have been bereaved themselves. So they know what someone is going through, and they know a lot of the things that they've had feeling and the emotions that cause them. We have various methods of support. We've got local groups based up and down the country. Now, sadly, we do have big gaps in some areas because we do rely on volunteers. And while we have a lot of people come through our service, providing the support isn't something that everybody feels they can do. We have national Zoom meetings, which at the moment we have a monthly men's group meeting, which is purely for men, because a lot of men will not talk about how they are feeling if they're in a mixed group, because obviously you're going back to the old macho image of a man is a man and should deal with it himself. So we do have a meeting purely for men. We also have a national meeting for Punjabi speaking females, because a lot of our clients are from the ethnic minorities, and they do struggle with cultural differences and religious differences. So it is, particularly helpful for those who perhaps use Punjabi as their first language to speak to other people in the same sort of setting and the same sort of understanding. We have a national helpline, which runs from 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock in the evening, where people can ring and get virtually instant conversation with someone. So if you're just feeling particularly low, or you're feeling particularly down, or you just feel that you need to speak to someone, you may attend one of the local groups, but they're only monthly meetings. The helpline is the place for people to go. We also have email support and a forum, and several of our groups organise annual retreats away for the weekend, where people are given counselling sessions, pampering sessions, and just a chance to talk to other people who have been affected by bereavement through suicide. Just a quick little word about the helpline. I do volunteer on the helpline as well, and we get lots and lots of calls from people. Since the onset of COVID, we have noticed that a lot of those calls are much more closer to the event than they used to be. Once upon a time, people would tend to ring us after the funeral, after the service, because at that time, as with all bereavements, everything sort of like goes quiet. You obviously, when you lose someone, you have your friends, your family, your relatives around. Everybody comes to pay the call and pay their respects and talk to you, and your time is occupied. But obviously, after the funeral, people drift back to their own lives, their own families, and their own ways. It's a ripple effect of bereavement, which I'm sure you've all heard of. But since COVID, we've had a lot of calls from people who are much more recently bereaved, sometimes a day or two, sometimes even the same day. And that's because of the isolation that COVID sadly has brought to people. We do provide, we are able to provide support to those people through emotional support. The fact that we've actually been there and that we actually know what they're feeling, and we can give them an honest appraisal of what's going to happen. You know, we don't dress it up for people. We tell them it's a long process. It takes time, but we do give them the encouragement and the support that they will get through it. Nikki asked me to give a little story from one of our clients, how we helped support someone during their loss, and I decided I'd tell my own story because I know it best, and I didn't need to ask for permission from anybody, and I can tell it exactly as it happens. In 2012, my stepson James became unwell. He was 19 at the time. He'd gone off to university, and it wasn't quite what he was expecting. I think he was disappointed in the experience. And we noticed that he came home quite regularly at weekends and sometimes during the week for the odd day in between his seminars and his lessons and his tutoring, etc. He was doing well with the work. He was enjoying the work. He'd gone down to do, and his tutors assured us he was doing well. There was no problems, and all his work was fine. It was just the assortment of things that affect people when they go off to university. The fact you're away from home for the first time for a prolonged period, you've got to look after yourself. And as I said, I think he built up expectations of what to expect on how can we put it, an educational side. The fact he thought it was going to be much more education outside of the learning. I think he'd be expecting debating classes and conversations about philosophy, which was the course he was studying, and stuff like that. And of course, it doesn't necessarily happen that way. Young people at that age go off to university, and after the lessons and things, they let their hair down. And James was not that sort of a lad. However, at the beginning of December, he had a relationship breakdown with his long-term girlfriend. She was also at university. They were both in Manchester, and Manchester was the place he loved more than anywhere else. That was the university he'd set his heart on going. And she was also at Manchester, a different university, and they were in separate digs and things, but close together. And all of a sudden, she announced she was ending the relationship. So we had a short illness of several weeks. It started off with taking an overdose, which I now believe was a cry for help. I don't think that was a serious attempt to take his own life. I think it was a cry for help. And he thought in his own mind that things would go back to the way they were before. She'd realise how much he meant to her. And life would return to as it was. Sadly, this wasn't the case. And he spiraled downhill after that. We provided as much support from the family as we could. We gave him all the love and support he could need. We had him at doctors, we had him at counsellors, we had him at therapy sessions. We joined a gym together because they said exercise was good. We went out and we got all sorts of, he was very keen on music and was very talented on the guitar and the keyboard. And we went out and bought him recording equipment so he could make his own recordings, etc., which is something he said he wanted to do. Sadly, it was all to no avail. After about 7 weeks, on the 23rd of January 2013, he sadly took his own life. His mother, of course, was devastated. He was her only son, and he was the centre of her world. There's no dispute on that. We'd been told about SOBS, and we went to our first meeting about 6 weeks after the death. There was about 8 of us at that meeting. Lorraine and Anne, who ran the group at the time, and some other people who had been attending for a period of months or a couple of years, etc. We took a couple of family members along with us, but they didn't attend any others. After that, it was just ourselves. At the outset, Linda was adamant she was just going to see what it was like, just be in a room with other people who had been through what she'd been through. She wasn't going to speak. She just wanted to listen to other people's stories and feelings. Anne and Lorraine started the meeting with their own stories of how they'd come to be there, which is how we always start our meetings. We give a little bit of a background into how we've come to be volunteers, so that new people, know why we're there and that we've been through it. And then one of the other couples started to tell how they had been feeling since the last meeting. It was just something resonated with Linda, and she just asked them a question at the end of the little speech, and they answered it, and that was it. There was an immediate outpouring from Linda, and she sobbed her heart out. She told her whole story, and she got everything off her chest to everybody in that room. And she just felt that everybody there understood. Up to then, we'd had people go, "Oh, I know how you feel." And they don't, because all bereavements are hard. All bereavements are hard. But to have someone who's chosen to take their own life adds a whole new dimension. And I'm sure this is the same for people who have lost someone to violent crime or bad road accidents and things. It's unexpected, it's out of the blue, and it's something that you can't prevent. We came out of that first meeting, and Linda was obviously distraught. And I remember the words she said to me now. She said to me, "Did you see that woman at the end of the room?" I said, "Well, yeah, why?" She said, "Did you notice anything about her?" I said, "No." She said, "She had makeup on." She said, "I never thought anybody who'd been through this would ever wear makeup again. I don't think I ever will. I don't know." But just looking at that lady who was, 2 years down the line, being not normal, but the new normal, as we term it in our circumstances, just gave her that little bit of hope. And that little bit of, well, she's come through it. I think that lady had lost a son or a daughter as well. And the fact that she was there, she had makeup on, she was living a relatively normal life, just gave her that little bit of a boost on that first meeting. After that, the monthly meetings were a must. Didn't matter what was happening in the world. We went to those monthly meetings, and Linda really, really lived for that fourth Monday of the month. The feeling of hope that talking to the other people in that room gave us really, really helped us. And more so Linda than me, but it helped me in the fact that I could see others had come through it. I could see what their experiences were, and I could use those little stories and experiences to support Linda in between the meetings when she was having a low spell. And together it helped us. And that's how the groups work. You go from month to month, and you go there for your first time, and you're an emotional wreck. And then as the months go by, you've seen the people who are further down the line, you've seen that they've progressed, and you start to see new people join, and you realize you're not at the stage they're at on their first meeting. You have moved on a little bit, and that also helps you. The fact that you can see other people who are coming along as you were 6-12 months ago, and you can you know in your own heart that you're no longer that person. You've started to come to terms with it. It gave us a feeling of hope, and we also had support from the group when we wanted to do normal things like go on holiday, have days out, perhaps go to a family party, be over overwhelming feeling of guilt that we were enjoying ourselves when James wasn't here anymore was really, really hard to deal with. But the fact that other people supported us in it really, really helped. And that's how the group works. We support each other through emotional support. Sometimes there's a little bit of practical support as well. If someone's got the coroner's inquest coming up and they're not sure of the procedure or they want to ask a question, one of us who've already been through that, we give them our experience, and that's helpful as well. So there's practical as well as emotional support. About 2-3 years ago, we reached a point where Linda started to find reasons why she didn't want to go to the meeting. She had to go down to see her mum because she wasn't well, or she had a cold. So we sat down one day and we had a chat about it, and she realised she got to the point now where she didn't need it anymore. If anything, it was becoming counterproductive because it was just bringing it back on a monthly basis. But it had served its purpose. It had helped her. And if she ever needs to go back, it's there. We get people who come regularly and then they drop off. And we mightn't see them for 12 months, but they just need that little booster session and they'll come back and they'll have a talk. And that's what the groups are all about. We're there to support each other. We're not, as I said, we're not professionals. We're people who have been through it. And the professional people will tell you that talking to someone who's had that experience is really, really helpful. Thank you for listening. If anybody's got any questions, please fire away.
Thank you for that, Derek, and thank you for sharing a very personal account there as well. Has anyone got any questions for Derek? So I can't see any hands up. Maria, can you see any hands up? And we have got the session at the end as well. So we've just got one more speaker. We've got Mo from Witness and Runcorn Cancer Support, who is going to give an account of how they have supported some families. And then when Mo's finished, we will stop the recording and we will have that open session then for any questions. Okay, Mo, over to you.
Good afternoon. I am the outreach and engagement worker for Witness and Runcorn Cancer Support Group. We're a charity that is over 25 years of age now, and we are located in the centre of Witness. Between, the easiest way to describe it is between the Corner House pub and Witness Fire Station. If you find either of them, then you'll see us in the middle of Alfred Street. We serve the residents of Halton, including people who work within Halton. They may not live in Halton, but they travel into Halton regularly. They are also welcome to access our services. We have a wide range of services to support anybody whose life has been impacted by cancer. And one of the main services we have is a counselling service. You don't have to have experienced bereavement to feel the effects of grief. Grief can be experienced when something in your life has significantly changed beyond all recognition. For example, a life-changing accident, a serious or terminal illness, divorce, loss of employment. The list is endless, but the emotions of grief are very, very similar. So we provide a counselling service to people who may not be bereaved, but they have cancer is impacting on their lives, or they're preparing themselves for a bereavement in the future. We cover a wide spectrum of counselling needs. Our referrals come from various sources, for example, and the list is endless, GPs, hospitals, other services within the borough, schools, or self-referral, or a referral by somebody who has already used the service and recommended us. The counselling pre-COVID was always done face-to-face in a room within our premises. Sometimes we find that we're counselling perhaps more than one family member or more than one person within the service users network. So confidentiality is very, very important in ensuring that we're providing a safe and secure environment to anyone accessing the counselling services. And we never discuss somebody else with another service user. So if we were providing counselling services to a mother and a daughter, we would never talk about each other unless it was brought up in a conversation. Confidentiality is very, very important. We use trained counsellors who are coming to the end of their qualification and need to do their qualifying hours. They offer their services to us free of charge, and in return, we're offering them a firm foundation for experience. All counsellors are interviewed, and it's a very, very rigorous process. I'm going to give you two short examples of support that we've provided with two short case studies. The first one was an elderly gentleman who was a carer for his wife, and his wife passed away in 2019 due to lung and liver cancer. The Macmillan nurse looking after her told him about our support group in Widnes. He accessed our support group and he experienced reflexology and Reiki, as well as one-to-one counselling. The one-to-one counselling was very, very helpful for him, and his counsellor talked him through a lot of difficult times. The reflexology enhanced the counselling as it enabled him to learn a technique of relaxing, and the same with the Reiki. He received a warm welcome from the centre, which is very, very important. And we have a homely atmosphere, along with the offer of tea or coffee pre-COVID, I have to say, as at the moment, we're not able to offer refreshments. He did say that if he hadn't have been able to access the centre, he would have had to have tried to find another support group that offered similar standards in Widnes, and he felt that that would have been very difficult for the knowledge that he had. The other case study is a lady aged 51 years of age, and she came to us seeking local support or counselling after suddenly losing her mum to cancer at the end of 2019. She tells us that she did some research and there didn't appear to be any local groups in her area that she could find until the Widnes and Runcorn Centre was recommended to her, and she made contact with us directly. We were able to give her support and advice that was needed, and it made a difference being around and in contact with other people who had gone through or were going through similar circumstances. And it also gave us something new to be part of, and she's made new friends in the process. And the counselling assisted her greatly to work through the grief of losing her mother, which was a very difficult time. We're also offering counselling via the telephone because of the COVID situation. And that can be difficult. As it's been said earlier on today, telephone counselling doesn't suit everybody. But we've had quite a few people that have taken up the offer, and we're now able to offer face-to-face sessions again under strict COVID rules. We ask anyone that's coming to visit the centre to do a lateral flow test at home, and we are very, very rigorous in our processes for cleanliness due to COVID, because we have to remember that in our environment, we're seeing people that are immune suppressed. So it brings an extra risk, and we have to have that extra level of security that we're protecting everybody concerned. And that's it, unless anyone's got any questions.
Thanks, Mo. Has anyone got any questions for Mo? No. So what I will do is, obviously, we'll send the presentation over to everybody, and it's got some of the signposts and information in there. And in the chat as well, I noticed a couple of links were put in there. I will include them in the body of the email as well. And we have got, Mo, if I can just ask you to move the slide on, please. So we have got a number of practical resources that we wanted to share with everybody as well. The help is at hand, Sammy mentioned when she was giving her account of how they've supported some families. So we've got that, all of these we've got as a PDF document. So I will send the physical document over to you all. Mo, sorry, can you just go on to the next slide? Back. Where were we? Yeah, that one. Next one. The one before that one. Sorry, the one just before. Yeah, so we've got what to do when someone dies and emotional support after bereavement. And Helen from Willowbrook, who gave us that first talk, has provided us with both of them. And then Mind have provided us with some information around bereavement that they give out as well. So I will send all 4 of them over to yourselves, like I said, along with any of the links that were mentioned within the chat. And if anyone is interested in joining the network, I did see in the chat Shell asked about joining. If anyone is interested in joining the network, you will have my email address. I'm more than happy for you to email me and let me know, and we can add you to that. And the date for the next meeting is actually on Tuesday, the 21st of September at 10 AM, and it is on Teams. Pre-COVID, we were looking at moving, because we were meeting at Child Bereavement UK in Widnes, and we were looking at moving the meeting on a monthly, but on however often we meet, and moving it to the different venues and different organisations. But obviously then COVID hit, so we've been on Teams since then. But yeah, if you're interested in joining that network, drop me an email and I can sort that out for you. So unless anyone has got anything else they wanted to add, thank you very much for your time. Mo, if we can stop the recording and then we can have the last few minutes just for any other questions or anything people might want to add.
Yeah, I would just like to add a testimony for the meeting that you were talking about, that as a service provider within the borough, it's an invaluable network opportunity. I've attended for the last couple of years and I've hardly missed a meeting. So I think that emphasises how important it is to me. It brings me in contact with a lot of other services where I can learn their information to pass on to our service users, and vice versa. I can keep everyone up to date with our services.
Brilliant, thanks Mo. And I think that's one of the things that we should be really proud of, the fact that we do all work so well together. I think the signposting that we do, certainly within the borough and the wider areas around us as well, we are really good at that signposting and sharing kind of that information. Thank you very much.